I think I'm still testing. I'm still getting used to it. Uh, you guys can clearly hear me what I hear what I'm saying, right? Let me share. Um, can someone confirm like the sound quality is okay? Okay. Okay. I'm gonna share the link. 1 second. Okay. Right now I'm coming live from Beijing, China, and it's around 10:36. I hope you guys can clearly hear what I'm saying because WeChat is like the Facebook is not actually properly working in China, so we have to use like proxy to get in. Mm, I think I'm waiting for questions from the audience also, and I will drop a link below for the little introduction or the background introduction about myself. And I've been in China for the past 10 years and working in different areas. And right now it's actually around 10:38 p.m. In Beijing, and the weather is actually quite rainy, and it has been flooding almost all the days in different cities in Beijing. And I have been like in China from 2008 till now, and it's been an interesting journey, to be honest. And I came to China after I finished my A levels. And as soon as I come to China, what happened was I was focused on my bachelor's degree, where I was studying electronic information engineering. And after I finished electronic information engineering, I actually started working in Microsoft for data mining and machine learning projects. Um, I would let me know just like which language I would be using to talk to you guys. And I think like since we have like a very diverse audience, it's better to just like use English. And the best thing about China, I would say, is that it's the language. The When I just first came to China, it was super interesting because I did not speak a word of Chinese, and everything here is completely done in Chinese. So the interesting thing was like when uh, first time I came here, even for simpler things like asking for directions, like where's what food we should be eating and what's not, what's inside this food, those kind of all things were like actually mystery. So, and slowly we started like adapting to the culture, adapting to the country, and slowly started learning the ways how it works in China. And a language has to play a very big part, I would say, here, because it's not like in other countries. Here, a lot of people actually do not speak English, so they actually like to speak in Chinese. And for us, it's a good thing because it actually forces us to learn another language. So I would say that coming to China was super interesting because it was one of the difficult languages to pick up and learn. And in Chinese, it took me, I don't know, like till now I've never had like proper training or education from like an institute to just like learn the language. I just like talk to people around and slowly picked up the language for the past 10 years. And interesting thing is, after I came to China and I started working and slowly moved into the Chinese company. For example, like Microsoft was like actually, even though it's a global company, in China, I worked here at Microsoft Research Center, where it was still like a little bit Chinese culture. So that the company culture was super interesting. People were really helpful. And after that, actually, I moved into uh, a startup. So this startup was working on like fashion technology, and we worked on like very early on virtual wardrobes, virtual dressing rooms, measurement systems, and picture-based like search methods. How to make like this retail, in especially in like fashion technology to accessible for like a lot of people. So in Sri Lanka, it's like very interesting because we are like actually having a very big drive in the apparel industry. So if you look at like, all the big companies in Sri Lanka, apparel is actually one of the biggest leading sectors. And there are like very interesting projects going on in fashion technology sector, which I actually spend quite a lot of time working on. And where we actually learned about a lot of interesting things. For example, the early problems that we were working on was like how to give e-commerce shops the ability to visualize clothing in 3 dimensions, or else like this very early on, like 2D visualization techniques. So this was like very early on research I was working on, and later on I see now fashion technology has moved into a very different sector where wearable technology has taken over, and you can see that a lot of companies and a lot of people actually wearable or smart jewelry sector, which is actually measuring most of the systems are measuring your different health matrices and generating lot of useful data so that people actually can use this data to improve their lifestyle or their health. So talking about China, so the topic for today I actually want to talk to you about is like, the China's technology landscape. And for the past 10 years being here, one of the most interesting things I've noticed is like one of the fastest growing economies. And super interesting thing about China's technology landscape, as I keep on telling people over and over again, is that when when I first came to China, people were still riding bicycles. I think I've been giving this example a couple of times. Now after a long time, people are still riding bicycles, but these bicycles are color coded. You might be all wondering what does it mean by bicycles being color coded. So if you go search online about companies like Ofo or Mobike, they have built this very new culture in China, which is um, changing the China's like economy, which we call as sharing economy, where like people use their smartphone to unlock a bike, and they actually use these bikes for riding up to 1 kilometers, 2 kilometers range, and it has actually become one of the multi-million dollar industries here, where they raise a lot of money, and there are two main competitors. And I would see like one question came up. What do you think about Mi Band's effect on wearable market? Um, I would say that like so the Xiaomi bands and these kind of wearables are actually uh, gonna not gonna have much more effect later on, because these bands actually just measure like a very simple health matrix, and later on I would say that like more and more complex wearables would come out, and the it would actually take very fast time for these new wearables to uh, generate much more useful data, because like these old wearables are like just generating, acting as speedometers or like heart rate monitors. But if you look at the latest research that was published today by MIT, MIT Technology Review, they were talking about this heart rate wearable that is very in measuring heart rate of a patient, and understanding different based on like users data. Lots of like user generated data, use deep learning to understand these things. And so when this technology comes, it's actually becoming a data game. So I would say that like for the questions that Hasala asked, I think these kind of wearable products would need to more depend on like very very strong data backup. Otherwise like they would not withstand quite well with the whatever future is going to come out. And so before this question, I would like to try to figure out how to do this live session, because actually this is the first time I'm doing a live session. So I would rather do like this. I would rather first talk about what's going here, like explain like the China's technology landscape and like trends, what's happening recently here. And then after that, what I would do is like talk to you guys and like see what are the questions that you guys are coming up with. So let's do like this. So where I was talking before was like this very new thing that happened in China, which was just like sharing bike rides, right? So if you look at what China is for a single second, there's really interesting statistics, right? Because if you look at something called WeChat, so WeChat, if you take 1 minute of internet in China, 395,833 people log into WeChat this minute. And that number is very high compared to how many people actually are in the internet sector. And there are like applications like Didi, which is like simple, like comparing to Uber, a Chinese taxi riding application. And there are like, there's Youku instead of YouTube, there's Weibo instead of Facebook, there's Baidu instead of Google. So China has their own products that actually helps the Chinese markets much better. And what happens, these products is that they are actually more fast growing than some of the Western products. But I would say, like, if you look at Facebook, the same tool that we are using right now is not accessible in China. So I am actually coming to you guys on live using a proxy server, so that, like, a VPN, so that I can actually talk to you guys. But technically, WeChat is actually, like Facebook is actually not working very properly in China. So, but we have an alternative. What is the alternative product we have? We have WeChat. So WeChat, when they started, it was something similar to WhatsApp, and they keep on started adding new interesting, I would say, interesting features. And now they are actually dominating the Chinese market in everything. So in the beginning, it was just a messenger application. Then later on, what happened was they started moving into more and more features, and now they're actually leading in mobile payment. And after that, they started a new culture with WeChat mini applications, and they actually started like new features with how to connect to media, how to do searching, how to do content distribution. So now WeChat has become one of the most important tools in China. So if you look at the technology landscape in that way, Western people might, or like the West or East, or like outside of China, people might think that China is actually producing a lot of fake stuff. So, and the technology is not that good. But being here 10 years, one of the things that I've noticed very early on is that it's not all fake. To be honest, if you actually go down south to the China, where we call as like, Shenzhen, all the bigger company products are all manufactured there. So if you see that, like all the drones that everyone is like very hyped about talking, the DJI drones, they're all like, manufactured in Shenzhen. So the interesting thing about DJI, because I met the founder in Switzerland last year, and we had like a very interesting conversation. And it was super interesting to talk to him, because what he said was 70% of the market share is owned by DJI. And once DJI owns 70% of the market share, and being a country where actually you can't fly drones quite a lot, because it's actually a very strict country, because if you can't actually, it's like Sri Lanka before, we can't actually get a drone and like start flying on places that where we want to fly. So imagine that kind of an infrastructure. You build the world's largest, like, the best drone ecosystem. So it is super interesting for me, and it is 100% Chinese product. And there are like more and more these kind of products coming, and because of the One Belt One Road initiative, and then this whole, like, this big push that is coming from the Chinese government in order to promote innovation and technology in China, a lot of companies are actually right now registering. Yes, like we are actually part of Global Shapers. So we had like a very big event in Dalian last week, where in World Economic Forum they actually released some interesting data, which was actually very, very astonishing for me, because they were saying that in China 18,000 new businesses are registered per day. So then that means, like, 18,000 new companies are opening up every single day. So people have more and more access, and companies have going through more and more into starting new companies, or like starting new industries and changing the technology, or like, the landscape in China. So what is super interesting is that how can we apply this knowledge into Sri Lanka? So if you look at one of the questions that I've seen here is that what do you think Sri Lanka should do to get the status of China? So I think it's not about like, trying to get to the status of China. It's about like what we can learn from them and how to adapt without actually getting into too much problems in later on. For example, if you look at China, of course we have air pollution here. So AI in Beijing is like not, I would say, not the best to breathe. And then again, you have to wear like, the pollution mask, and every time you wake up in the morning, you have to check your mobile app and see whether what are the AQI readings, whether I should be wearing a mask, or I should put like AQI monitors in the house to just make sure that all the air purifiers are working properly. So of course, how did it start? It started because of this really fast growing industrialization. So I would not suggest that start something like that in Sri Lanka, because China, if it starts in Sri Lanka, we would not be able to fix that problem as fast as China is fixing it right now. Because if you look at how China actually face that problem, they actually started uh, fixing the problem in every single aspect, putting a lot of resources in. So how we can learn from China is that, like, they use technology in a really interesting way. Because one of the most interesting things I would like to tell you is that this formation of QR codes. Because when I first came to China, this QR code mobile payment methods was actually not very popular. And as soon as within very few years, they actually picked up. Right now, this, even from the fruit seller to the vegetable seller to, like, the small business owners, they use QR codes for payments. And I have traveled around to many countries. This is the first country that I've seen this thing, that people are actually using QR codes for doing like transactions in this kind of like a way. And that actually gives a lot of convenience for the user. And I can see that is the step that would be super interesting for Sri Lanka to begin with. Because if you look at Sri Lanka's payment infrastructure, we still don't have that mobile payment gateways as much as we should be, because especially being very good with IT. So Sri Lanka is like blessed with many engineers that who are doing super interesting projects, from uh, building the London Stock Exchange to working with like other multinational companies to building super interesting engineering projects for as outsourced projects. But very few of those outsourced projects has been applied to our own country for its own development. So what I see here is that we should be able to start from the payment point. If we enable payment in the country, that people can just like pay for online services, that would actually help more and more entrepreneurs, more and more startups to just like build solutions around it. And those solutions would actually give access for people to be more creative and just like solve problems uh, very effectively. So I think this is what happened in China. The companies like Alibaba, they actually built these huge infrastructures in the country that enable small, medium-sized businesses, which we call as like SMEs, to just work very hard, and they were actually getting the proper value for the effort that actually they give out. And I actually think one of the interesting things that China is moving right now towards is like very data oriented approach. Because if you look at China before, China actually, for 2 years back, there was a very big buzz about drones. And then it moved into AR and VR, like augmented reality and virtual reality based, like applications and activities. And now it's actually being a data game. Right now, a lot of companies have invested. So in China, we call it BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. So these are three big companies that are like shaping the China's internet architecture, or internet ecosystem. So yesterday, Baidu released their like one of their open source like kind of program for deep learning, and like for especially for autonomous vehicle driving. And the CEO actually himself came to the conference completely from a car that was driving by itself. So it's the same approach that Google is doing in US. And what's interesting in China is that they actually invited a lot of companies and the startups to join with them to build this system much more better. So like not only in the autonomous driving, there are like a lot of other industries where actually data like oriented approach is like getting quite popular. So if you look at, there are like certain things that I think you should have noticed when if you like follow tech space kind of questions online, that when China is actually moving into very good internet problems, in very good internet solutions, most of this documentation is actually in Chinese. So when it comes into Google or like more searchable media, it actually takes a little bit of time. So especially one of the interesting things that's recently been happening is that Chinese government has been putting a new initiative towards startups and especially like AI. So there's more and more tech parks, more and more events, more and more funds has been generated to encourage companies and encourage organizations to work on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning kind of aspects. And if you look at like in China, there's like Tsinghua University. They have like a very big quantum computer. One of the fastest, actually broke a record recently. Uh, so they're pumping resources into this area. So in China's technology landscape, I would say that they're moving more towards like a data-oriented approach and try to apply these technologies into problems that they have in the country to solve. So if you look at, I would say like a general day of my life in China in technology, it's just the moment you wake up, you can actually have an application that monitors the AQI quality outside and then again just tells you whether you need to wear a mask or not. And that is like if you keep it apart, what's happened after that is that from the moment I go out of the house, I just need to get a bike. I scan a QR code. I get into the bike, and then again, it charged me very little amount of money so I can ride the bike into the train station, or I can get a cab from somewhere, and that's also another app. And when I go to have lunch, I can order like my food through like another application. And if I want to send one paper document to someone else, a guy would come to my office, pick it up, and just like deliver within 1 hour. And I can pay all of these services from movie tickets booking to entertainment to anything, literally anything, even hospital stuff, using a mobile phone just simply by scanning a QR code. That gives a very big advantage for consumers to actually interact, use technology to do a number of things. And from this, what I've always learned is that it's actually very interesting that in Sri Lanka, how these problems can be actually applied to Sri Lanka's problems, so that like these solutions can be applied to Sri Lanka's problems. And especially because we have enough people in the country, enough very well educated and very well skilled IT engineers in the country to implement these solutions. And it's happening right now, but it's actually happening in a very slow rate. So one of the biggest problems I've seen in Sri Lanka right now is like this rapid prototyping. So this is something that I would like to get little bit time and talk. So if there's engineering students like who are listening to this live stream, one of the most interesting things that's about building products, if you're actually building hardware products, is that you need to actually get your idea realized very fast. So in countries like Sri Lanka, the biggest issue that we have is that we don't have that architecture in terms of that tool chain to get that thing done. So if we want to actually design a PCB, for us to get it printed out, it's quite difficult for us to find that resources in the country to just get things done. So you need to actually send these PCBs to outside of the country, to China, to get it printed out, send you back from eBay, and then start working on it. So one of the things that I would say is that building maker spaces, so building these kind of environments in the country or facilities where students and people, makers and engineers, startup founders can access these tools, more and more people would be able to actually start building more and more products. So how can we enable this? It's all about like figuring out the process it takes to actually come from an idea to a product. And I've seen like recently there's like a lot of challenges, like a lot of companies are putting startup challenges, and students from different universities compete in these challenges, and they actually win prizes also with really good ideas. But what's the next step after you realize an idea? Like after you get into funding, what you need to do is like make the product. So when you want to make a product, we don't have that kind of a manufacturing background or that kind of a facility in the country to do this at a small scale. Uh, so in my own story, what we did was like the same thing. So we actually came up with ideas, and then again we applied for competitions, applied for these kind of like events, and we won prizes and applied for patents. And me being in China was very simple, very faster for me to come from that space, point of ideation to production, because for us it was just taking a flight to the south of China, and where we have the access for almost everything, from strap designing to material selection to 3D printing to PCB design to fabrication to assembly. Everything is in one place. So you can see recently more and more companies from US are coming to China, especially for 3 months, 6 months programs, to just get this exposure of how to rapidly manufacture products. So I would say that, like, for people that who come from that side also, they have like this language barrier where like it's not easy to go to these factories, find resources and just get things done. So the biggest problem I would say China facing right now is that how to facilitate these huge number of people who come there to get their products like into the production stage. But before it was a little bit difficult. Now the things are getting more and more better because the infrastructure in Shenzhen is more becoming foreign friendly. Countries like cities like Shanghai, they're changing their regulations on giving visa and like a lot of other facilities for foreigners and entrepreneurs to start their companies in China. So especially I would like to say there's a new visa category that is in China, which should be really interesting for you guys. If you guys are entrepreneurs and want to start like some sort of a project in China, is that the Chinese government would actually give you like an entrepreneurship visa. It's a new visa type where you can actually apply for this visa by producing your presenting your business plan and going through that interview process, and even you will get the funding from the government, Chinese government, because they are actually willing to help more and more innovative ideas and more foreign talent to come to the country. So before some years back, this was not the situation. It was a little bit difficult to get into this place. So now China is opening up its arms and just requesting and asking more and more foreign entrepreneurs to come to China, because they also understand it's a win-win situation for both people. And I would like to say that the China in the technology landscape is moving at a very fast rate. So what would be interesting is that it's not only one sector. So this is the most interesting thing. So they are like working with different organizations and different small organizations within the country to like develop all the areas in China, because China is not like a small place. It's a very big country. So if you look at Sri Lanka, it's like this. It's not only the capitals that like they're planning on like developing. So in China, they're like major cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Nanjing, Shenzhen, like these kind of areas. But then they're the second and third tier cities. They're still actually spreading tech parks and a lot of technology help, like building their infrastructure there, so that more and more companies can move into these cities for their cost reduction. Like, so imagine you're running like a startup, a technology startup. So the only thing that you need is internet. So if you have a very good internet speed and office with like a few chairs, and your team is like willing to just like relocate to an area, you can actually build a company without any problem. Because this is actually a really smart move, because instead of you go to a very expensive city and start like your um, company, what would happen is like your expenditure, your cost would be like skyrocketing very fast. But if you actually do the same thing in a second or third tier city, what would happen is that you could reduce your operations cost and focus more and more onto the product. So recently, there are like cities. For example, there's a city called Huizhou. So it's like very near to Shenzhen, and China is actually putting the government is very interested in putting more and more resources into developing tech parks there, so that the living cost in that city is like relatively lower than the cities around, which are like major cities. So this kind of like an idea is super interesting for countries like Sri Lanka, because we are still small, but instead of just developing like Colombo, Galle, or Kandy, or like these major cities, we can actually move the development into more and more inside the country and develop the infrastructure at the same time. because in Sri Lanka, the internet infrastructure is actually quite good. So it's like we have fast internet, we have very good resource pool, so we can actually work on more and more projects. So let's think. I think I'm gonna try to answer a few questions here. Um, Yeah, so Hasala Dharmavardhan is asking me again about something related to heartbeat monitoring, training data using from Pol H7. Yes. So here the interesting thing is, like, there are like many ways that you can do this data collection, but I would say, like, for this purpose, let's just send me an email, or, like, contact me privately. I would actually tell you a little bit more about, like, how this troubleshooting would be, like, uh, how this would actually help you. So the give like a little feedback here. There are like many companies right now moving to this area of like health monitoring, especially not only like athletes or people. They are like moving into more elderly care. And I was like talking with one of the directors of Intel yesterday, and we were talking about how they're actually applying these technologies in like home care situations, because what they are envisioning in the future is that there would not be any necessity to have like a hospital. So basically hospitals are for surgeries and more complex operations, but later on, smart homes, the idea of a smart home where you can sit on a chair and you would be actually constantly monitored, and there are like systems that would help you generate information. If you have like some problems, it would actually talk to the relevant authorities and just takes care of you. So talking to you about this area, like this online health monitoring, or like not online health monitoring, remote health monitoring is getting quite popular in like different countries, but there is always a problem around like data security here, because if you look at uh, collecting personal data is then again a little pickle, because I would say that there was a so if you guys know about the background story and Forbes, there's a product that we actually are doing right now. It's a smart condom, so it's like a sexual health product. And what we are trying to measure is like people's like activity and in their reproductive organs. So there was one company that actually got sued very recently because they were actually collecting data about their like sexual health, and they were actually using the data without the user's consent. So the company actually got sued for a very big amount of money, because the moment you start collecting data, health data especially, things get like quite sensitive. So what happens is that unless you are just like trying to use it with and like there are like a lot of complicated scenarios around it. So I would say that this is what something that you need to think about. What are the questions? So we have question. So what is your biggest drive? So the biggest drive I've been having so far is it's I think like my passion comes from this problem solving. So the biggest drive I would say just I have is like I get joy by like solving certain problems, especially in the healthcare sector, and developing accessible solutions. So I'm a very big fan of this idea of low cost engineering. So low cost engineering is that if you build some particular device, if it's quite expensive, only a very little amount of people have like access for that. Especially if you are working on the healthcare sector, it's actually quite not the ideal situation, because if you have built the best healthcare product, everyone should be able to access it. But the problem with that is that when you try to do that, it's not practical, because the sensors, the electronics, the components that you use, the production time would actually make the price go a little bit expensive. So that's why like we are thinking about a new approach where we call as like this smart material based technology. So smart material based technology is that we are actually planning on using materials that react um, like conditions. Like for example, that there's a concept that we've been like trying to work on recently for like underwear lining. For example, like a lot of women actually, not a lot of women, like, generally like in the area of a company we are working on sexual health. And one of the interesting ideas that we are trying to play with is that there are like sexually transmitted diseases, STD, which are like chlamydia and gonorrhea, where like a lot of women actually might have these problems, but very few women just show that or like express symptoms. So like it says that like around 60% of women actually don't express symptoms, but for else, like guys actually we show symptoms. So the interesting thing here is that if we actually trying to use smart material based technology for the underwear lining, what happens is when it reacts with the different type of this bacteria, it would actually change its color or texture. So these kind of ideas, these kind of area is what we derive as low cost engineering. That means like the amount of energy that you spend on designing this like material is actually relatively very cheaper than electronically integrated products. So which has like a battery which needs to which has like a number of problems that need to solve before it goes which it reaches the mass market. So I would say that the biggest drive is actually coming from the joy that you get by working on these interesting technologies. And the other thing question is that what do you think about next generation tech startups? So the next generation tech startups, I would say they would have to be highly data dependent, because if you look at the technology skill set or the technology landscape, what's happening around startups right now, unless you are like heavily data dependent, it would not be like the data that you just get or the feedback to give to the user might not be like 100% trusted later on. So that more and more startups would be actually have to collect a lot of data from users and just generate patterns and give more useful actionable information. So the biggest so I can actually tell a little bit about like relative to what we are doing. So help startups who are in this sector, especially building wearables for health solutions. What's going to happen is that they need to actually be smart. By just right now, most of the wearables, so like company products, their smartness is defined by just like putting Bluetooth or a couple of sensors into the product. But like I think the next generation startups, it's just like more biosensors and more like natural sensing elements, like that you don't have to actually externally wear. I would say that like the next generation startups in healthcare or fashion tech would be like more seamless integrated solutions. So seamless integration means like you don't have to wear certain kind of like things externally, like all the sensors would be integrated for day-to-day objects. So and I would say like the next generation startups would be like more data oriented, so that they would be actually adapting fast and releasing fast. How can someone get into the Forbes like you? Okay, so the getting into the Forbes list is some has always happened from like recommendations. So I was selected into the Forbes 2017 list of healthcare and sciences. So basically, from the past work that we've been doing and the awards and all those things, what happens is that you get recommended by so I was recommended by a VC and venture capitalist to the Forbes committee, and after that they actually conduct an interview, and you have to produce like publicly available information of you, which you can find online, and they all have to be like publicly available, so that some way of like accessing through a URL, or they should be able to see your name or content, and they would verify all that information, and then just you would actually get into another interview round, and which is a phone call, and after that actually if they think that you pass the standard or like the bar, you get into the Forbes Asia list, and it was actually my first time also, so super happy that I was able to just get into the list. And I had this another Sri Lankan guy from my same high school from Nalanda, so we actually meeting in 2 weeks in Philippines. So because this year the Forbes 30 under 30 conference is in Manila, in Philippines, which would be like on 25th. So I would just share some content and the pictures and videos that's gonna happen from the event. The speakers lineup is like super interesting this year. What do you think is the key to your success? So the key to of my success is I would say that it's consistency. So in China, like when you come into a country like China, it actually challenges you in like many ways. and we had a very interesting support system here, which help you not to give up no matter what happens. And I think the quality in China that like you need to develop, or like quality in life that would be like able to me to come this far, like at this time, I would say that it's saying just like no, and like just like not giving up, I would say. So because imagine getting rejection from your Sinhala, imagine getting rejection from English, and imagine getting rejection from Chinese, right? So you get like you build this hard shell, and you try to actually improve quite a lot, because like it's the biggest population in the world, and imagine the competitiveness you have like in the universities here, imagine the competitiveness you have in businesses here, because comparing to Sri Lanka, we are talking about the private universities, we are talking about government universities, all those things put together, and that would not even cover like one district in China, the amount of universities that like they have, like the students that they have. So you come to a country with zero Chinese knowledge, and you studying among these Chinese students who are extremely skillful and talented, and then you compete with them, and that means like you have to be like no give up attitude. So I've had like, still right now I work from 9 o'clock in the morning to 3:30 in the morning. So it's a very bad impact on my life, but by my health especially, but still that is what it takes, I would say, like here to get into something, because it's not that easy. Because if you look at what's going on, I came to Sri Lanka for a medical checkup. I have high cholesterol, so I'm actually just 26, but it's bad habits, I would say. So that and because we have to do constant flying between factories, like sometimes we are taking cars going from factory to another factory, which is uh, so far away. It's just like so just basically I'm going from Sri Lanka to Pakistan and Bangladesh like on every 2 days, every day. So basically that's the amount of work that is required to get work done here. And it's not I would say like but it's a super interesting challenge. And if you keep on building these qualities of like not giving up attitude, I think it just works out fine. um, Another questions that I have been having is, will web-based health products still supplement mobile in future, or it goes mobile and IoT? Okay, so Zamir has been asking me this question about another IoT-based health question. Okay, it's gonna be like this. So the mobile actually is gonna, what I believe is mobile is gonna be like the best data collecting product that's gonna come in the future. So because if you look at the mobile phone, so there are like companies that are integrating molecular sensors into the camera here. So if you look at like one of the guys were asking me about like heart rate monitoring. So if you use like the mobile phone camera and cover it with your finger, there are algorithms that people have developed that actually uses the mobile phone camera to detect your heartbeat. So imagine like that was the first stage that happened quite a while back. Now people have integrated, like, so if you can go and search a company called SICO, SICO. So they are the company that invented this like little thing that measures like the molecular what is it, like molecular like the composition of like food and etc. So it's a molecular sense, and now it's been integrated into a mobile phone. So that means like I can take my mobile phone, look at food, and then again the food can tell, like then the mobile phone can tell me how many carbohydrate I've been eating, how much protein that we have. So especially we've been developing these kind of solutions with like Thermo Fisher. So if Thermo Fisher Scientific is a company who's working on food and water, they're like one of my clients. So they're also like working on these kind of interesting solutions. So later on I would say that like it's going to be mobile first, because there are going to be sensors that already be integrated in one device, and cloud is more powerful, so that you can actually do data processing there. So the web-based products would be like more management admin-based kind of like interfaces that you can do more hospital level one-to-end kind of like transactions. So I would say that like there's another area that you guys should be thinking about. This whole big data kind of like the idea is now coming into the mobiles. So if you look at the latest research that was published by Microsoft Research, you can see that it is super interesting that they have taken this little teeny tiny chip and put it to an Arduino that can run deep learning algorithms. So they like can run this complex machine learning algorithms. So that means like this hardware is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, which would be like used in like more and more affordable medical devices later on. And I would say that so the other questions that been asking is, what's my future goal? Okay, this is super interesting. So my future goal right now is how to work with Sri Lanka, I would say. So I've been trying to figure out like a couple of projects that hopefully gonna work out soon. And it's not easy because like I've been coming to Sri Lanka for different projects, like for different companies, and there are like success stories, there are failure stories, but that I want to be the key person between Sri Lanka and China in technology transfer, because I really feel that I have a lot to offer from here to Sri Lanka. And because it's not just like import export kind of a job, it's just like really understanding what Sri Lanka is lacking in terms of technology landscape and try to bridge that gap. And we've been getting a lot of free things from China, I would say, like donations, etc., but we haven't still get any single item that can actually massively increase Sri Lanka's production capacity. I'm not talking about like implement a factory there, just like a proper system where like Sri Lankan people can access the resources here and work and move on like innovating and building new solutions for serve Sri Lanka. So I would like to actually, my future goal, one of the goals is like to how to closely work with Sri Lanka in this area of bridging the two countries through like technology exchange. And another thing that I would just like to work in Sri Lanka is that work more and more on nonprofits, because we are like running a nonprofit organization called Business for Better Society. So in China, which we are bridging like NGOs with like donors, and in Southeast Asia like countries. So I want to actually like move more towards Sri Lanka and try to understand what are the problems, and I haven't been like much around in the country, to be honest. And every time I come, I try to do like try to see what needs to get done, and then like work with people, go out lunches with people, and try to figure out how to allocate my little period of time where I am when I'm in Sri Lanka, to just like learn as much as about the country and see how it is going. And because the only access that we have from outside Sri Lanka is like newspapers and etc. But what I'm really interested is the startup ecosystem that is like recently been developing quite fast. And so it's been like 52 minutes in. So if you guys have any other questions related to tech or China or any way that like I can help around, you can just ask. So I would just spend time answering your questions. And let me see whether like I've missed some questions from you guys. So thank you, Akshika, for arranging this like topic also. And actually he sent me a couple of questions back that he would like to actually know the answers also. How can someone enter Chinese market? Okay. So this is a question actually he asked me like a while back, so I would actually give that answer also. So it's not easy, I would say. So if you actually look at entering into Chinese market, so you need to understand like how you enter the Chinese market. So there are countries, there are products in Sri Lanka that who enter the market as just purely like import export basis, like selling tea or selling gems or those kind of like products. But if you're actually thinking of entering the market as like a company, that's like a technology company, then you actually have to offer something super interesting or something different from that they already have. To be honest, like so in Sri Lanka we have like this mobile like taxi sharing app, right? So in China, in the beginning there was Didi Dasher. Didi was like their taxi app, and then Uber came to China, and Uber had to go back because Uber could not compete with China. So that because in China that time there was like Didi, there was Kuaidi, and there was Tiantian Yongche. There was like 49 companies competing in that small space. And now to give you an example, the same thing is happening to bike sharing. So there is Ofo and Mobike, the two biggest companies that are leading the game, but there's Blue Go Go, there's n number of other areas, the companies that are working on the same market. So it's super hard. I would say, like, it's one of the difficult challenges if you actually have not defined your user base. So, like, who are your primary customers? What are you offering them? And why are you better than just like, why your service is better than like other people's services? Because China is like a service driven country, because we all love free stuff, to be honest. In China, in the beginning of startups, this was the same game that they were playing. They were actually giving lot of free coupons, free rides. Everything was free. The moment you download a new app, you can just like travel around the city for like completely free for a week, because they would have burned that much amount of cash to get secure their primary user base. And slowly they moved into a, like, business model that makes sense for the both investors and them. So I would say that it's not easy to enter into the Chinese market as like a technology company. Then the question that you guys would be asking me is like, how did we start? So that requires, like, one, it's not just me. I'm a co-founder of the company. I have like another Chinese partner, which is super interesting because we both have the background in computer science and, like, electronics and this area. And after that, we started building our company, and we have around right now 35 to 40 employees working with companies like Microsoft, Intel, Tencent, Thermo Fisher, Jeep, Roche, these kind of like companies doing products in data products and different kind of like solutions offerings. And when we started, it was also the same thing. Like, we competed hard and we built like more custom solutions for them. For example, like, the interviews that we go with people, like for bidding projects that we go with biggest companies in China, we actually did not give them a template that other big companies offer. We just created like, custom catered like a presentation to them for the solution that we're offering. So we were small, we were hungry, we were fighting hard, and we still are. So I think that is the point why we actually are quite okay as a technology startup in China, and like being able to secure these big clients at like, this time. And so I would not say it's an easy journey. And there's a question: can you help decentralize the IT landscape? Currently, almost all the startups and tech businesses are based in Colombo, but China has successfully achieved this. Okay, yes. So this is a super interesting question. I just explained like this a little bit back, a little while back. So it's actually the initiative in China was coming from the government, because in China, the cities like Shenzhen, Beijing, Guangzhou, and Shanghai are very expensive. So the expensive is not only the housing prices, it's expensive in facilities, food, transportation, everything. So what happened at that point was like, even the startup founders realized that, like, there's no way that they can actually, so only way that they can do it is just buy an apartment in Beijing and put all your developers there, and then again they'll be like, working under a house, the same way Apple was built, same Alibaba was built, same all the other companies were built. But at the same time, then China realized that rather than packing all this talent into one place, what if, like, we can move them into second and third tier cities? So for accessibility factories to, like, resources to etc. So how they did it was like they've started working with the local governments, like, building these IT parks and offering grants. Basically what they did was, like, if a startup is willing to relocate into a second tier city with like very good facilities, I would say that, like, the IT parks are like Facebook type offices, and they would just fund them, give them, like, money, grants, support, and all those things. And then even the founders were really happy to relocate, because it made sense, because they're like cutting down their development costs, cutting down the like a lot of other, like, problems that they have, and they can only focus on what they want to build. So a lot of software companies, they actually moved into this environment, and then they started building products. And then when the time is ready, they started branching up in, like, different cities and just use it. So in Sri Lanka, most of the startups are based in Colombo, but what are the other cities? I mean, just like, there are a lot of cities in Sri Lanka that people can start startups, because I think it's the ecosystem. We only have TED Colombo. Why don't we have TEDx Gaul? Why don't we have TEDx Kandy? Why don't we have TEDx Jaffna? And I don't know whether we have it, but I've only seen like TEDx Colombo. That's why maybe. But it's the same thing. So you do talks, you do meetups, you do building the community. So it's actually a very big part of the community leaders also. So the community leaders in Colombo are like working very hard to build the startup community, build this infrastructure there, so that more and more founders are like very comfortable with like building their companies with people that they like, sharing the ideas and growing fast. So if you can get that model and replicate throughout the city, throughout the country, and I think that would be like very interesting. So um, how I can help to decentralize this IT landscape is just like getting more and more involved with like community leaders and tell them, ask them what they exactly need, because what we can do is like for companies that who need manufacturing, we can help them with like manufacturing, or else like we can be voices. We all can be voices and just like do more and more Facebook live shows, more and more reach out to people and just like tell them how important it is to just do this, so that at some point like officials in the government or people that were like related to this industry would listen to the voices that's come out from like these founders, I would say. So because I haven't seen like a very big push towards like this too, to be honest. Like if Sri Lanka needs to be built, it needs to be built by founders of small companies, because big companies are already working very hard to do what they're doing. So I would say that it's our chance or our time to build the services into the country which is not there. So big, I mean, like I'm very proud of like some of the companies in Sri Lanka that are starting like very different type of businesses. So I was like looking at one of my friend's Facebook post yesterday, and I saw that like there's a startup in Sri Lanka that is helping you print stuff online, so that when you actually give your documents to them, they would actually like find a printer nearby and find for the cheapest price and deliver it to home. So that those kind of like little services are what's like China is like very good at. So everything can be done by mobile. So why do people have to suffer a lot? So there's not. So like I mean, it's a very different country, I would say. I'd really hope like more and more people who are watching this would just come to China and not just go to Canton Fair and buy stuff that you can buy from PETA, but take time to just like see the country and like see what's happening in here, factories, how things are made, and do these kind of tours. Because most of the people who come to China, they just like go buy bargain stuff, and then again, because on a funny note, like every time my family asks me to buy something from China, and they say like, yeah, just like get us this, it's like cheap in China, I just ask them to go and buy it from PETA, because they can find better prices there rather than the prices I buy here. Because there are so much more here in China that can offer, rather than actually bargain and cheap products. So I would say that like it would be super interesting if you guys can come over to China, and then again as a trip, and just not only see Great Wall and all these like monuments, but instead of that just move into like Shenzhen, to be example, like see factories, how PCBs are made, how silicon molds are being done, and really see that fence around that what do you call Foxconn, for people are like saying that they jump off, and then again there's a fence around it to save them. Like see these factory line workers, how things are getting done. It's a super interesting country. So if you guys have so thanks, Biman. I'm trying to create a startup hub in Bandarla. Could you please inbox your email? Sure. I would actually like, inbox my email, so we can actually have a chat about that. I'm super happy to help all of you guys if you guys need anything from China. And it's actually like 11:35 in Beijing, so I would like to ask you guys if you guys have more questions for people that who just joined recently. I can just talk a little bit more and answer your questions, and let me know if you have like any other things that you guys need to you guys like to know from me, especially about the Sri Lanka's like how China can help Sri Lanka's IT infrastructure, like a startup culture, or else like what do you like to know about China. So yes, I have eat snake. So if it's a question that you guys are all thinking about. Um, okay, so I think we did like a little bit over an hour so far for the live chat. And okay, so any questions? Let me see whether if I miss some questions through the chat. Hmm. Okay, I think I almost answered like almost all your questions. And if you want to reach out, I'll just like put my email and my WeChat. Actually, like in China, the easiest way to reach out to a person is through their WeChat. So I'll just put my WeChat also in the link. So just reach me via LinkedIn, WeChat. I want to just like help you out for questions that you guys have about China. So I think I'm gonna head out and I'm gonna go to sleep and wake up tomorrow morning. And hopefully you guys had like something to get out of this live show that we did. And hopefully the perspective towards China has changed a little. And let's hope like we can do more and more interesting stuff with Sri Lanka and China soon. So take care, guys.